kinds of packaging and labeling that are going to have content on them that are going to be specific to that region. They will go into this section. For the investigational application in the US, many of those investigational documents are placed in this section because they don't have an appropriate place in the CTD when it has been created for marketing applications. But as I had mentioned earlier, there is guidance document directly from the FDA about how to position that information in the investigational application. This is an example of the US guidance document for each different type of application that's being submitted for marketing of what would be contained in this section. The references that are made here across the top with the numbers are those references made to the CFR or the Code of Federal Regulations, where it says certain pieces of information are requirements in order to get your application, your marketing application, submitted. And you see it varies by the type of application that's being submitted, with the NDA across the top there, the common technical document, they are all in module 1. Then for the NDA, referring to the CFR section, and the ANDA and the BLA. Other regions will have similar information for their module 1 of what needs to be provided depending on the type of application that you're submitting. Now I'll begin with the foundational modules. For module 3, this is the quality module, the one that will contain all of your CMC information. The general outline matches the other modules, which is the table of contents, the study reports and related information, and your literature references. Now of note, in the CTD format, you'll see that this section, all of the numbering begins with 3. That's because it's in module 3. And then it will go sequentially after that. Under the study reports and related information, which are going to be the majority of your information for the quality section, it also includes a letter. This is the only module within the CTD foundational modules that includes a letter. And that letter is associated with the type of information that goes into that section. So there's an S for the drug substance, your API, etc., a P for the drug product, an A for the appendices, and an R for regional information. This is just an excerpt of the outline for module 3. And I begin here with the drug product because the drug substance information that's required is exactly the same as this. It just has a letter S in it and relates to the drug substance information as opposed to the drug product information. So these are the way that the items will then be numbered. It goes in the specific order of putting in the description and composition, your pharmaceutical development, the manufacturing information, and the information on your excipients. Then moves into the control of the drug product with your specifications and methods and so forth, your reference standards or materials, the container closure information, your stability, and then moves into the additional sections, your appendices, regional information, and literature references. Now, for the appendices, there are only certain regions that will require the appendices. For example, for a biologic product in the US, you need to provide detailed facilities and equipment information. If it is not required by regulation in the other regions, or for like a drug product in the US, you don't need to include that information, you leave it out. And you just leave that section out. If you don't have a novel excipient, same thing, you leave that out. And the same with adventitious agents. If you have no appendices, then you will not have a complete 3.2a section. You just leave the entire thing out. The regional information section is for when you receive a request from one of the regulatory agencies that you're working with to provide them with a certain set of information that doesn't fit within the rest of your CTD, then it will go into the regional information section. Again, using an example from the US, something that would be provided here is a blank batch record as well as an executed batch record. But that information will be provided to you in the guidances that are published around the CTD by each region where you're going to be filing. So you will have to look up those guidance documents and make sure that you are complying with the regional requirements for the documents to include. The literature references section for Module 3, I have very rarely ever had a literature reference in this section. The most common thing that I have ever provided in this section is if a method is published that is not part of a standard pharmacopoeia, but it is the basis for a method that we are going to be using, then we would put a copy of the literature reprint in this section. If you don't have anything to include in this section, again, you just leave it out. For the Module 4, non-clinical study reports, you see it's got the same basic outline with the table of contents, the study reports, and the literature references. Then they are very specific about the order in which the information is presented. First, within the species of the, excuse me, the non-clinical model that's being studied. And then it's also very specific after that, that it goes into the order of the route of administration, starting with the intended route and then followed by studies that have been completed for these other routes of administration. Now, for any of these, if you don't have them, you don't need to worry about it or do something in each one of these categories. It's simply if you have done any of these, then they want it submitted in that specific order. And then I won't spend a lot of time going through the entire listing of the table of contents, but they then tell you which order to submit which type of study, beginning with pharmacology, pharmacokinetics, toxicology, the local tolerance, and then any other studies that don't fit within the prior structure, you would submit them into this section. And then again, followed by literature references. As with the Module 3 section, it is infrequent that there are literature references provided in this section, in which case it would just be left out. In the case where you are submitting an application that using a US structure, again, as an example, which would be a 505(b)(2) NDA, where you're relying on a product that's already on the market to form a lot of the basis of your safety, you would mention that at the beginning of this section, and you may not need to include anything in the section. If you have to do anything specific for your product, like if you're changing a route of administration, then you may need to do 1 or 2 toxicology studies to support that. Those would be included in this section, along with the statement of the reference drug that you're using, and then you don't need to include any other information. When you're submitting an abbreviated new drug application for a generic product, this section, the entire module, can be left out entirely, and you don't need to address it at all. For Module 5, the clinical study reports, again, a very similar format to the others. The one difference here is that there's a table that lists all of the clinical studies required in this module. A similar table is also required for the non-clinical studies, but it's included in the summary section, which I will show you in just a moment. For clinical, it is required to be placed within the module. And then similar again to the non-clinical section, it lists out the order in which the different types of studies should be included, beginning with the biopharmaceutics studies, which is where you'll put information that you do if you are submitting a generic application. So you would have the bioequivalence studies in here, and you'll also put the methods that you use in order to do the analyses on that data within this Module 5 section, and not in, for example, a Module 3 section where you have many other analytical methods. The ones that are specific to human studies go here. If you have methods that are specific to non-clinical, those should also go in the Module 4 section. Then moving through, the pharmacokinetics section would come next, and then pharmacodynamics, and then the efficacy and safety. followed by then your post-marketing experience. The post-marketing experience that goes into this section are going to be from post-marketing experiences that you have anywhere else in the world, and then case report forms and individual patient listings. For this one, it will depend upon the region you're going into. There are different requirements about when case report forms must be submitted and what individual patient listings must be submitted. So for each region that you're going into, it will be important to look at those guidance documents and the regulatory requirements by regulation or other guidance put out by that specific region for what requirements of information that you need to submit. And then lastly, our literature references. Now for this literature reference section, in some regions, there are required copies of references that need to be provided here. Most specifically, they are copies of documents or references that are referred to in the clinical overview section. Generally, this will include meeting minutes from the regulatory agency that you're submitting to. In some cases, meeting minutes from any regulatory agency you've ever met with. And then also any of the specific cited references from literature that you refer to in the clinical overview to support the discussion that you put into the clinical overview. The clinical overview essentially summarizes your rationale for why you should receive an approval. The Module 2 summaries then have built off of each of those and is arranged in the format shown here. Starting with the table of contents, a brief introduction, which gives simple information about your product, its name, its the indication that you're targeting, some of those types of information, moves into the quality overall summary, and then the non-clinical overview and the clinical overview. The overviews, as I mentioned, are where the sponsor gives their opinions about the collection of the data and their rationale for why the product should be approved, why it is safe, why it is effective, any comparators that it's referring to, why it's better than that comparator or comparable to that comparator, and so on. And then it moves into the non-clinical written summaries as well as the tabulated summaries. So as I mentioned, the table of the non-clinical studies is incorporated into this section in the overall summaries. And then is provided the clinical summary of the information from the Module 5 section. Pardon me, my slides decided not to change. Okay, the CTD lifecycle management. Once you've submitted your application in CTD format, you'll be required to submit all of your future submissions in CTD format. This will include during review, when you may submit amendments, and then after you've received an approval, you will have to submit what are called supplements or variations. Investigational applications in the US never get approved, so everything to those applications will always be considered amendments. For the marketing applications, you would be required to submit supplements that are required by the regulation in the region. So in the US, if they require notification or approval, then you would submit those supplements. In Europe, they're called variations, as they are in several other regions, but the submissions are then required based upon the regulations of that country. There's no commonality to which ones are required, but they do need to go into the CTD format when they're submitted. So some considerations that you should think about when you are thinking about doing a CTD is to consider what you have in place at your company and what gaps you have in terms of the individuals who are going to be preparing the CTD, such as the technical authors, quality reviewers of documentation that's going in the CTD, regulatory affairs personnel, however you name them, but which ones need to be in place in order to assist authors in knowing the content that needs to go in, to prepare overall summaries, to do additional analyses on information that may be required in those summaries, and so forth. And then what the priority is as far as your timing to get those individuals in place, either by insourcing or outsourcing, by the way. But who do you need to have in first or later as your CTD is progressing on the company's timeline? And then what training needs to be made? If the individuals in the company are used to doing everything in paper and you're moving into more electronic, then there may be some training in that regard, perhaps on the CTD structure itself, because it does differ somewhat from perhaps what people were doing before. And then thinking about systems or templates that you need. There are templates that are offered for every one of the CTD modules, as well as the reports that you can purchase from external sources and bring them in-house as a plugin to your Microsoft Word, for example. And when someone is creating that specific document, they can open the template, which will already have the CTD format applied to it. And then they fill in the content in the appropriate areas in that template. Then you also have to think about SOPs or work instructions that need to be created in order to prepare your CTD in the most appropriate way. One of the most major ones that doesn't often get put into place early enough is around naming conventions for your reports, both on the report, an actual title of the report, but also for the electronic compilation of them, you should follow certain conventions, and also other conventions about creating documents. What is going to be your standard for how you abbreviate information, what abbreviations you use for that information, what you call your document, what you call your particular product, where you use parentheses, capitals, commas, etc., how you refer to your company, all of those things you want to have consistent. So you should create a style guide that will allow them to be consistently prepared across the documents. So the resources I mentioned already, your authors, certainly make sure that your authors are familiar with writing for regulatory audiences so that the documents will be prepared in a way that it contains the information as the agencies would be wanting to review it. And then who your reviewers are going to be. For all documents that are authored, there should be reviewers that are identified. They can be technical reviewers from the same function. They may be cross-functional reviewers who are familiar with the information or who the information has to apply to. And then you may need regulatory operations to assemble the document, to check the formatting is done correctly, to manage templates if you purchase them externally or if you create your own internally, and so forth. I'm sure that there would probably be several other resources that you may need to consider to prepare the CTD internally. And again, this could be resources that you get from internal sources or external sources, all from your expertise, technical expertise, or your individual reviewers, etc. Now, giving you an overview of the eCTD. The eCTD is an electronic common technical document, but an important thing to note here that I alluded to in the beginning is it is not preparing a common technical document and then putting it onto a DVD and sending it to the agency or emailing electronic copies to the agency. The eCTD, very importantly, uses a common electronic format that must be used for the ongoing life cycle management of the application. And I'll share that in just a moment. But it is a global standard, so the agencies who accept the eCTD will require that you follow this standard. Agencies that don't have the eCTD in place at their organization yet may allow you to submit on a DVD or by email, whatever is the most appropriate means to get the amount of information that you have sent to them. But this global standard was also developed by the ICH. There are many, many technical guidances that relate to how to set up your eCTD. I won't go into all of those details today, but they are available. And the eCTD, just as with the CTD format, is also being accepted by other authorities as well, who are starting to implement their capabilities for accepting this global standard format at their agencies. Now, as I said, this is based on a certain set of standards that must be used consistently across regions that are truly going to be submitting the eCTD proper. The main part of it is that it has an extensible markup language, the XML. In the industry, this is often referred to as the XML backbone because it requires a certain set of metadata that identify the document and the submission itself in a way that can be read by the computer, and then it knows where to place the documents that you put into it, where to place it in that eCTD structure. More importantly, in the life cycle of the CTD, when you submit those documents electronically, it will potentially replace documents that are in there, or it will add new ones, or it will provide updates or amendments on those documents, so that when a reviewer at an agency opens up the eCTD, they're able to see only current information, or they can go back and look historically at what information was in there. It gives them the option to be able to see all of that. And that is important for the reviewers. When you are submitting new information, it will highlight what that information is that's new, so they know exactly what to go in and look at. Now, going into this XML backbone are documents primarily created as Adobe Acrobat PDF documents, but then also for different types of data, you would have CDISC, SDTM, electronic data sets. I'm not going to describe all that, but as I said, the technical requirements are specified in guidance documents so that you can refer to them. For the labeling, it's required to have HL7 structured product labeling. This allows the agencies also to upload that labeling to its own website, as well as it can be accepted by various pharmacies or other agencies that take the drug into commercialization, so that it can be referred to by patients and physicians, other healthcare providers who need to refer to it. And it will also update more quickly whenever new labeling is approved and submitted in this format. It will update to all of those various locations. For statistical files, they are generally required in SAS program. And then Microsoft Word can also be provided when it's required or requested. Now, just as an example of when that would happen is in the US, for your marketing application, they will often request that the labeling and the package insert be submitted in Microsoft Word format as well as in PDF format. And the reason is that they will use the Microsoft Word document to make their changes in a track changes sort of format, so that they can send it back to you, and then you can make your comments or questions or changes within that same document. So it becomes a working document. Then what the eCTD does is it takes this triangle that we looked at a moment ago, and it becomes a file structure format. Now, the example I'm showing you here is a real live example that I photoshopped from an investigational application in the US, simply what I had access to at that time. But I would just point out a few things on here for you. So at the very top of the screen, you will see that there is a number that starts the entire folder structure. That is the application number that must be pre-assigned by the regulatory agency that you're going to submit to. All of the regulatory agencies have a mechanism in place for you to request that number in advance formally. In this case, the number is 900-603. The next folders that you see there are called sequences. The sequences begin with quadruple zero, and then they sequentially go up after that for every additional submission that you make. The quadruple zero is going to be your initial submission in the eCTD format. The next one will be whatever kind of amendment that you need to make to that submission as the review process carries forward, or in the case of an investigational application, it would be as your studies carry forward and you need to update information. Coming down to the middle section here, this is opening up that folder under the quadruple zero, and you'll see then that there's a folder for each module, and then as well some folders that support the eCTD, a utilities folder, and then the index and a check file that will make sure that the information is properly inserted into those modules electronically. That's why it's very critical that you follow those technical guidance documents that are published, because there is an electronic validation that gets run on the content of the eCTD when it is provided to the regulatory agency. And if it does not pass those validations, it will not be accepted for review until corrections are made to the way that the eCTD has been prepared. Moving down to the last row here, there's an opening of the Module 1 folder. And in the Module 1 folder, you see the next one is for US. So this is a US submission that's being made, and it goes into a folder called US. The next part of the folder structure is what is specific to that region. In the US, as they present in their guidance document, they have their forms first, and then under the forms is which type of form is being submitted. And then the cover letters, and then labeling and so forth. And then also it will have the XML backbone file that is included in order to provide the metadata that puts that information all into the appropriate location. This is when you look at it through an eCTD viewer. Now, what an eCTD viewer is, should come with eCTD software if you purchase it internally for your own use. If you work with an external company, they can provide you access to a viewer, but then it will show it to you in the same file structure as what I was just showing you, which is a basic Explorer file structure. It will show you the multiple sequences as you see in that top, and then in the lower panel, you will see that current documents appear for all the various sequences in this current section. So it's what I told you, that when the reviewer on the other end opens it up, they're able to see what's current. They can go back and look at anything that was in there prior, but the appearance on the current screen will be what has been updated or modified up until that current point in time with the submission. The eCTD viewer will also allow clicking on one of the documents and then opening it up on the right-hand screen. And without getting into too many technical things about the eCTDs, the eCTD viewer, the eCTD software, etc., the important thing is just to know that there's also going to be this life cycle view, which is what's on here, so that they can go in and see anything that was submitted previously if they want to do that. And there are many other capabilities there as well. Some of them look a little bit different than this. There are several different eCTD software companies that you can get software from. And similarly, several different eCTD software providers or contractors who will prepare this information for you. And although the display may look different for some of them, they still do the same things and provide the same type of information. The XML backbone then replaces the traditional table of contents that you would prepare for your submission It depicts submissions across multiple sequences and submission types. And then the operation attributes, which I mentioned a few moments ago, enable the lifecycle modification. So for each document, you identify if it's new, if it's being deleted, if it's being appended, or if it's being replaced from the other documents that have previously been submitted. It's also important to follow rules of granularity. And this is how you break your document down into pieces. So you're not submitting one entire continuous module from page 1 to 1000, for example. You're submitting many smaller documents, and that is part of granularity. There are guidance documents available for what mandatory granularity you need to provide. And then it also gives you instruction when you can choose to be more granular. Otherwise, you need to follow the granularity of that guidance document. And then the other attributes, or the metadata, is what are used by the browser to group the related information into the eCTD viewer. And these again are explained in the technical documents. I apologize, that is additional information. It's explained in the technical documents that you can find online for each of the regions that you're going to. This gives you a quick view of what some of the additional sections look like in an expanded way. There are ways to provide, for example, information on 2 different drug products, for example, in a combination product. And then you see some of the granularity on the right-hand side here for a clinical study report and how it's broken down into many different sections, as well as with its attachments. I'm not going to provide detail on all of these different things, but just to give you a sense of the way that things are broken down, what may be required, and you will then have to look at it for your specific product to see how it should be put together. This is an example of the metadata that you put in. And you can see that it's just very basic information. The important things are going to be having the appropriate application number, as well as submission number, which is the same thing as your sequence number, the type of submission, which will be, in this case, an original application. It could be an amendment or a supplement, and so forth. The remaining information right below there will be filled in automatically by your eCTD program, what backbone version, what regional version, etc. And then your product name there at the very bottom. Some of the metadata will also come from your file naming structure. Those are things circled here in red. They are elaborated on in the guidance documents, but this also is important in what I mentioned before, that you will have to come up with your own style of how you're going to refer to your product, or it will not match up correctly whenever you put it into the eCTD format. Even if you just use a capital letter instead of a lowercase letter, or if you don't use a space every time, or if you abbreviate something once and don't abbreviate it the next time, it won't match up properly. So for your metadata, you should have a guide that says specifically how you're going to refer to each of these things, and that should be used consistently from the very initial application all the way through to future applications. And that will also hold true for any of the items that you need to name yourself, such as these things here that are called leaf titles. Now, I know that we have too short of a time today for me to get into a lot about what each of those things are, but for those things that are not already prescribed by the ICH, where you have to come up with a name appropriate for your product and the work that you did, many of them are called leaf titles, and you need to do that consistently so that when you make updates or add information or anything like that to that section, it will properly associate itself with the previous information that was submitted. The other considerations that you have is the steps of publishing. I've listed out generally what these steps are, but you have to do certain things before you enter what's called publishing, like making sure that the document has the correct contents, but it's done in the right format. If you've had to scan documents, cleaning them up. Then the publishing is where the regulatory operations person or the publisher will go in and start to put in bookmarks and links within that document, making sure you've got the right pagination, headers, footers, and so forth. And then post-publishing is where you'll begin to link the documents to one another within each module and then within each submission and across modules. So the quality control is very important. It should be provided across those stages of publishing to make sure continuously that you're in alignment with the guidance requirements and that the internal procedures are also being followed. All of those things should be checked continuously because any modification or one single change could make some of them no longer correct. You should also have verification checks completed and then the final QC and validation that comes from the built-in eCTD compilation tool. And that is the same tool that will be used at the regulatory agency when it is received on their end. The primary considerations are that inflexible, the section headings and numbering system and folder structure are inflexible, and they should not be changed. This is very different for folks who worked prior to eCTD, where you could make up any names or numbers that you wanted to, as long as it made sense to you. Now it is inflexible. The authoring templates, which I mentioned to you before, you can prepare your own internally, or they have many companies that sell them externally and can plug into your software so that your reviewers are able to use them. If you're outsourcing to do eCTDs, you still need certain elements internally, and those include templates if you're going to use them, the Adobe Acrobat professional version, because you need to be able to convert documents into PDF format, a controlled repository to put your submission information so it doesn't change after it's been created, the viewing software, if you want to look at it internally, and then a secure location for your published sequences, again, so they can't be changed, and then the digital certificates that are necessary for security and for signing. If you are going to produce it in-house yourself, you'll also need the actual eCTD software, which is a publishing tool, the validation software. If you're doing your CDISC files, which are data for non-clinical and clinical studies, the raw data, you'll need validation software to apply to that. And then also the interface to the agency specific portals. In the US, it's called the Gateway. Canada also uses the same gateway. And then Europe and other regions have their own portal that you need to transmit the information through. I would recommend doing QC checklists so that you are consistently performing the same QC check regardless of who does it, checking against the appropriate standards, who's responsible for doing it, and so forth should all be included. This is an example of a source document checklist and what you would want to look at. It definitely could use additional information in here as well for your own internal processes and procedures. And then also a checklist for the overall submission contents and making sure that anything is checked that needs to be checked. This is an example of what that might look like. And at the very bottom, you'll see that it says all significant validate errors. When you run your validator for the eCTD, it will give you a list of errors that it finds, and it will indicate whether those are significant or not significant, as well as a suggested correction. So that would be something that you want to do before you send in your CTD. And then the additional SOPs or standards that I recommend are, as you can see on this slide, I mentioned already naming conventions, also study report numbering, how you're going to do your PDFs, and so forth. Those are all going to be important SOPs. And certainly for your company, you may have other ones that you want to have added. Anything you want done consistently, as you know, in working in the GMP space, that's what you need to have an SOP for. Also remember, when you're coming up with your naming conventions, that the reviewer doesn't have a lot of space where they can see everything. So think about that in terms of making sure that your titles are as short as possible, but have the most meaningful information put first if they are longer. So in summary, you'll want to plan and prepare in advance for taking on CTDs. Make sure everybody gets trained on what their activities are going to be. Prepare SOPs and summaries to cover your CTD preparation as well as eCTD work. And then make sure that you have high quality and compliant documents that go in, because as I said, they can be rejected on an electronic technical error as much as later for content. And with that, I have completed my presentation and will be happy to take questions if you have any. And I do believe that there are some questions on the Q&A in here, so I will look at them and answer some of those.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Peggy. Really, we are delighted to have this session this evening, and I really appreciate for sparing you such a good time. And I'm sure, as far as this GCA first webinar is concerned, everybody has all their concerns, and they are happy with this technical awareness. And we are really thankful for your such an illustrative and elaborative self-explanatory presentation, if I say. This is good for all, for the whole pharma sector. And before going to the question answers, I'm sure this will be, there will be some sort of time constraint. So I will, first of all, I will also thankful to all the participants who have spared their time, precious time. Again, it's a Sunday. So I'm really thankful to all the participants who have participated in this webinar. Somebody was asking, as far as the certificates distribution is concerned, I'm sure no problem, no worries. You will be getting this certificate. It's an honor that, and we will try our best to get the signatures from Peggy also, as far as this certificate is concerned. So again, going for the question answer, I will request that you will be, as far as the answers are concerned, you will have our email with you, and you can also like on the Facebook and LinkedIn and also on the YouTube. And as far as questions are concerned, you can ask even on the later stage. We will refer to Peggy all these questions, and we'll try our best to get all those reply and answers from Ma'am Peggy. But I'm sure if somebody has at the moment some questions, we can go for that, no problem.
Yes, and also I will make the presentation available to GMP Compliance Academy to be able to share as it's requested. And as you say, certainly answering questions that may come in by email may be more effective than trying to get to everyone's question today.
Yes, I'm sure, absolutely, I agree with you, because might be some of the questions might be needing some explanations or elaborations. So again, as Peggy said, you have the contacts with us, you have the emails and everything, so you can ask on those. And ma'am, can you, just a last, if it's not a question, but just a comment that can you please add few comments on pharma after COVID-19, Peggy?
I think that it still remains to be seen really what pharma will be like after COVID-19. I do think that you will see a lot more things happening electronically, much as what we're doing today. I know with the companies that I currently work with, we are actually working very effectively in doing things electronically. There may be more healthcare provider visits that are done electronically, even for clinical studies when they don't require blood draws or something like this. And so I think we will see changes. I think that many companies are considering these various changes now, as are the regulatory agencies. But really, I believe a lot of it is still in planning stages, just as this COVID-19 hit all of us by surprise in a way. we're having to adapt and learn. But I think there's going to be a lot more flexibility and a lot more coordination perhaps required by the company, but we will certainly persevere and continue to do the work that we need to do. Even agencies, individuals are working from home, still conducting meetings, still carrying on their reviews. And I just believe that's going to be a lot more of what happens in the future.
Thank you, Peggy. I firmly agree, because as the world is changing at the moment with the COVID-19, so definitely the pharma industry will do accordingly and will move forward. Obviously, there's no stoppage like that. Even the COVID-19 is there, but definitely things will be changing as the world changes. So once again, Peggy, from myself, Shab Hakim, and Kamran Atif, who is the lead in this GCA, and our team also, really thanks to you and all the participants. And definitely we will be seeking your advice, your expertise in the next events. I'm sure you will glad to have this event also. You will also having all those comments on the screen, as far as everybody is saying, thank you very much, Ma'am Peggy, for this informative session, your time. Yes, this is right. I think they are absolutely, they were saying like this, and you deserve for that one. Thank you very much once again. So nice of you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, participants. Thank you. So see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.